So at this point, I'd like to
Because nobody
introduce
listens.
Dr. Heidi Hayes-Jacobs. She's an internationally recognized expert in the fields of curriculum and instruction, having consulted on issues and practices pertaining to curriculum mapping, dynamic instruction, and 21st century strategic planning. She has an upcoming book series, Leading the New Literacies, Digital Media Global, to be released in December of 2013, which maybe she has some copies with her today. Heidi works with a range of national and international organizations across education, entertainment, and government market sectors. In March of 2013, she worked with the Chinese national schools in conjunction with the Sino-Canadian schools through AKD International on issues regarding modernization of curriculum. She has been featured in the New York Times, Educational Leadership, Child Magazine, NASSP's High School, National Public Radio's Talk of the Nation broadcast, and on the world's largest online professional development network, PD 360. Her doctoral work was completed at Columbia University's Teacher College in 1981. The fundamental backbone of her experience comes from her years as a teacher of high school, junior high school, and elementary children in Utah, Massachusetts, and New York. Please welcome me in welcoming Heidi Hayes-Jacobs.
Thank you. Hi. Good morning. Good morning. You got up, you did it, that's good. First thing I'm going to ask you to do is I need you to sit with somebody, or if you're with somebody now you're not on speaking terms with, now's a good time to move. I'm going to engage you in a series of tasks, both classical pedagogy, listen, very careful, and new pedagogies. So we're going to be looking at what goes on behind this work. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to get with a partner. If you don't want to sit by anyone and you want to talk to yourself out loud, I live in New York, it's perfectly fine. Okay. Right, 30 seconds. Get in a group and move your chairs a little bit, okay? All right. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So a couple rules of engagement. I've been an educator a very long time, almost 40 years. I started teaching at the age of 5, but I do a practice that I have for a long time. I could be in front of a group of 2,000 people, or I could be just sitting with you in your school, just the three of us. But I always have an empty chair. Have any of you ever seen me use this before? And in that empty chair, what do I have? I have a student. Is there a classroom teacher up here? I'm not going to embarrass you, I promise. Is there a teacher up here? Can you give me the first name of one of your students? Emily's here. Emily could be 5, she could be 15, she could be 12, she could be a graduating senior. We only have a major one rule in terms of the content of our discussions. I don't care where I am, but I'm going to hold you to this and you hold me to this. You can raise any issue you want that deals with curriculum, instruction, standards, the integration of technology. The 4 structures that have everything to do with what we're talking about today that are inhibiting you tremendously because of their dated intersection. Your schedule, the way your students are grouped, whom you work with as a faculty member, and the use of space. Please remember these 3 letters, SVS, shared virtual space, and SPS, shared physical space. Okay, those are the most practical things that affect you. You can raise any issue you want today with me, or if we were in a meeting, on this one rule. Don't raise anything unless it's in Emily's best interest. Otherwise, keep it to yourself. We don't have time. Now, you and I might not agree on what's in her best interest, but as long as we're both trying to help her, we're okay. Because here's my concern, especially at a conference like this. You've probably attracted the people who are really engaged with trying and risk-taking. I'm sure that's probably true. I mean, most of you chose to be here. I did see a van pull up and people were pushed out, but I think most of you chose to be here. The thing is back in schools, we can do a lot of cyber dabbling. Oh, I'll try a little of this, I'll try a little of that. But schools run on habit. We run on habit. We can't do that anymore. No one in this room would take their own child to a doctor who said, I'm uncomfortable with technology, I've heard of X-rays. So the deal is it's going to be in Emily's best interest. That's the bottom line. The second rule of engagement is if I need your attention on the screen because I'm showing you something technical, if it's all right with you, I'll just wait till I get everybody's attention. It's not because I need you to look at me, I need you to look at the screen because I'm modeling something. I'm modeling something. It's because if you miss what I show you technically, then it's going to come back to bite you. Too often in schools, teachers will say, I don't like iPad initiatives. The kids aren't looking at me. I'm going, what, are you insecure or something? What's wrong with you? The point here is if you need someone's attention, you ask for it, and you have a reason for it. How's that? Agreed? And then on occasion, I'll give you timed tasks. I'm going to bring you back 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, how many of you are online now? All right, would you please go to the following site? Listen carefully. Listen carefully. How many of you have used Today's Meet? About a third of you. You're going to go to todaysmeet.com, listen, /NH, as in New Hampshire, NH21. Todaysmeet.com /NH21. And what we have is we've created a virtual space for us to use, and unlike Twitter, it's timed. It's like Cinderella and the Pumpkin. I made this one for 8 hours. 8 hours from now, it's gone. So we save it as a transcript. And I was just saying, I was talking with my colleagues here, and what I was sharing is that when I was in China, last time I was there, I got to work with the Chinese national teachers, and for the day, listen to this, they freed up an open internet site. They could go to anywhere, nothing was blocked. Can you imagine what that was like for them? I have an image of them. You'll see this picture later. They look like the happiest people you've ever seen in your life. But they won't ask a question in front of people. Guess where they ask their questions? Oh my gosh, I have a Mandarin. I can save it, it's in Mandarin. And there's many uses for this tool. But I'm going to be interested in your comments and your questions. And one thing I'd just point out to you, and Kathy, would you do me a favor and put in your website? If Kathy puts in her website with the full HTTP at hyperlinks, do you see how I have a hyperlink further down the page? That means if you ask me a question and I want to post any site, like Wolfram Alpha, for example, say a math teacher asks, I can post it. That means I can share resources. Who else can share resources in this room? Everybody. So we're going to be in this together, and we'll be using this as a back channel. Thanks, Kathy. All right, so to begin with, if I might, I'm going to draw your attention to this. For the last 2 years, I wrote a book called Curriculum 21 that came out a few years ago. ASCG chose it as its world member book. Since it's come out, I have a new habit. The habit is that every 2 weeks, I try to learn a very demanding app. Who knows what I'm getting at? I'm not talking about the Weather Channel. I mean, I think it's exciting to get the temperature on. I mean, I'm happy for people when this happens. But what I like to do is expand it, because I've started to turn a science concept on its head for myself. Let me explain. Isn't it true that form should follow function? Who understands what that means? So as a teacher, I tend to think, well, what is it that I want to accomplish and what tools will support it? So many people say, and I've known from my work in curriculum, that's the truth, curriculum mapping and other areas. People will say, don't you think you should lead in this work with the curriculum and teaching, and then let the technology follow. And I'm going, I don't feel that way anymore. See, I'm limited by the tools I know. If I have new tools available to me, then I start to think about the teaching and learning differently. Do you follow where I'm going? Let me put it even more directly. I have two very good friends I've had for over 25 years. That's Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. Personally good friends with them too. They often talk about, in Understanding by Design, what is it we want Emily to know and be able to do? But we're limited by what we know and are able to do, and we tend to run on habit. So I have this new thing where I push myself. This is called 3D timeline. And in it, what I did is I went through and I created a three-dimensional timeline. I looked at archival images, and I thought I'd pull up just a few of machines, technology, tools, not just that were interesting, but absolutely started to change practice. The first one I pulled up was from 1938. I think this is seminal. It's the IBM first test scanning tool using what were called smart pencils. Ever heard of smart boards? Then we begin to see the walkie-talkie. To me, this is one that affected you. This was the Canadians during World War II because it initiated point-to-point communication. Take a look at Skype. So it could limit the channel of communication. This is the overhead projector, and I want to tell you, we should have probably a centennial at some point. But the point here is it came out in 1945. It was originally used by the military at the end of World War II. Then the police took it over, and then us. I don't know if you want to read too much into that sequence, but that's how it happened. This is UNIVAC, the first stored computer. I loved finding this picture. It was the US government that did the research and work on it. They look a little bit in awe, by the way, if you look at their faces close up. This is my favorite. This was the Ditto machine. Who remembers them? How many of you can do the motion almost automatically? Yes. What I remember, and how this affected curriculum, of course, was we would print material, but what I remember is the children would smell it. And I think we were actually medicating kids all over America. And in fact, some teachers really liked it too, maybe too much. Maybe there's a good batch down there today. Anyway, Logo. Do any of you in my generation remember Logo? And this was, of course, the first computer program that was developed to help learners. See, most of the work with technology wasn't about education at all. We were an afterthought. That started to change. And I think another thing changed. I chose to take this image from 2001 Space Odyssey, which came out in '68, Kubrick's masterpiece, because there's something about art and artifacts that tells us a lot about fears and what is going on. This film was huge. And what was the name of the computer? HAL. Anybody thinking of NSA? I just thought I'd throw that out. But the point here is that our anxieties were perking up too, even as we were beginning to create great opportunities. The first worldwide technology game was Pac-Man. If I were looking at a worldwide game, I'd give Mahjong and chess a few points. But this was the first time we could play games without ease, and you could go anywhere in the world, it would begin to change. And as we all know, gamification is, in fact, the new direction in many ways for curriculum work as well. We'll touch on that in a moment. I think this is the biggest, 1982 with the internet. Connectivity changed, communications changed. And then I would give this is my own historical view, I would say the 10 years of the 90s through 2000 was the edu-surge in technology. I remember seeing the first I went to IBM headquarters, which is not far from where I live outside of New York. They showed me the first CD-ROM designed for schools. It was clunky. Who remembers these? Very clunky, but at the same time, you just knew it was going to emerge. None of you use CD-ROMs very often, am I correct? Did anyone in this room went, oh, I've got to go back to my room, I left my CD-ROM up there? You just aren't doing that. But at the time, we became a market. And in America, market forces drive education. Let's be very honest here. We'll have another discussion about the testing industry a little bit later, if you like, on that one. and I'm not joking. This is big. This is Netscape, and it was the first search engine. Do any of you remember this? You could put in a word like Italy. It took a long time. You could have flown to Italy and come back. But it was amazing, and it began to change the way we did research. I also want to note that it was in 1994 you began this conference. And in looking at this question about honoring the wonderful Krista McAuliffe, I learned from your leadership that it was Dorinda Gidney, who was a colleague, a teacher, who wanted to follow in her pathway that was the impetus for starting this conference. There's something about her, too, I'd like to acknowledge, about colleagues supporting and giving hope and honoring others. There's something very moving about being invited to be here, I must tell you. And just personally, we were chatting about this. There's something about Krista McAuliffe's face that just gets to me. You all know that look. You all know that gift. You all know that light. And what's amazing is here we are today doing this work. So I want to honor Dorinda and this organization for supporting it. And I think what it does do for me is it underscores the one value I value more than anything in our field on the part of teachers and learners and in leadership, and that is courage. So in looking at this question, we honor her. In 1994, it began. We continue on now. Let's look at some technology tools. The BlackBerry, which was in a sense a small keyboard. What's happened to BlackBerry sales in the last few years? Tanking, because now it's been replaced with much more so is voice-activated technologies and certainly touch, which is so highly intuitive. This, to me, and we had a discussion about this last night, Carolyn and Kathy and I met at the little cocktail party thing downstairs, and we talked for a long time. And we were talking about the issue of the flipped classroom, which I think the phrasing needs to be rethought very carefully here. I did a little research on this. It isn't new. The first group to write about the concept of saying if students eventually, because this was actually back in 2000, if students eventually have more access at home, I'm saying 2000 because that's about almost 14 years ago. Many students didn't. But if they do, we're going to be able to rethink where we dole out tasks. It was in a publication from the University of Miami called The Inverted Classroom. And I think the idea here then is it started to occur to educators that we're going to begin to change the element of time. That instead of thinking of school as the 40-minute block, it's going to be 24/7. And we're going to need to have a pedagogy, a way of teaching that catches up with that, which is one of the things I want to get at today, because I think this work can be very superficial and exciting, and the accusation of bells and whistles is accurate if we're not thoughtful and deliberate about the way we do integrate these tools. So I would say arguably when Khan Academy began putting out its materials, and we now know teachers can do and should do, and many do create their own, we started to see a surge of interest among teachers on the possibilities for looking at how they could carry out instruction in new venues. To me, this is one of the most important, and I don't see it enough, and I do work around this country. The classroom webpage is your classroom. Your website is your classroom, as much as the four walls. Because when Emily goes home at night, and if she's a seventh graders are a little distracted. Is there anyone in this room who tries to teach middle school? That's the right way to say it, isn't it? I mean, you just try, you do your best. She's a little distracted. So when we think she's paying attention, you don't know what's going on in her head. According to the University of Minnesota Start Time Study, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are asleep until 10 in the morning. And so the notion here is if I can provide an opportunity or a safe place or a place for us not just to post or blog, but to really be able to derive opportunities for guided instruction and work and input, my classroom is my webpage. And you know who else is going to need her own? She is. Emily's going to need it. And it'll stay with her all the way through. It's an expansive notion of the digital portfolio, which has been with us now for almost 12 to 15 years, too. So I began to see more of that emerge. We launched our clearinghouse. I was inspired by people like Frank Baker and you, Kathy. I mentioned that yesterday. And what happened is around the world, after Curriculum 21 came out, and it was the global book for ASCD, we started to get flooded with questions from teachers. Where can we go, and how do we start organizing all these amazing applications? How do we make use of it? I was interviewed by Ed Week about a year ago, and they said, Dr. Jacobs, what do you make of the American teachers' resistance to these new tools? And I said, they're not resistant. You're talking to the wrong lady. I said, they just want to know how to do it, when to do it, given everything else that's on their freaking plate. I mean, that's the truth. We developed our clearinghouse. You're going to see what I'm going to put in because I do now want to start to have benchmark assessments. And one of them, as you'll see, is that every teacher creates a clearinghouse for the units and work they do. But guess who else starts to create their own clearinghouse? Emily. That, in fact, is a formative assessment. So we begin to see that emerging. I can't believe this. This just kills me. The iPad was only released about 3.5 years ago. Doesn't it feel ubiquitous? You look everywhere. Do you know, in Australia, it is so popular there now that many of the states, because Australia has states, are putting it out to potentially have a law passed so that if parents give their kids an iPad, they get a tax write-off. The haves and have-nots are going to be the 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who come into kindergarten versus those that don't. So we begin to see the release of touch technologies. And now one important point. The image I have here is not the Common Core. This is from New Zealand. Around the world, and it's very interesting to me, but roughly between 2010 and 2012, every major developed country in the world has shifted standards to recognize the new literacies. This is worldwide. This isn't just here. I even think on some level, and I wrote a book that came out last year, an Illuma book called Mapping to the Core. Illuma book is an interactive book. It's even more than an ebook. The one thing I acknowledged was that I think the Common Core is very imperfect. I don't think it's a perfect document. It wasn't written by Athena. People wrote it. It has problems in it. I think speaking and listening is vastly underwritten. And I do think there's mention and attention to digital and media, not sufficient for my way of working, but it's there. And what you're seeing then is now we are in a new decade. I mean, almost 14% of the 21st century is over. And what we see is around the world, what you're doing here is not uncommon, and especially developing countries want to have a piece or a stake in this work. I think the next new trend are things like worldwide workshops for gaming. I just pulled up Global Laurea because I think it's very interesting. Recently, I worked with the Commission on Higher Education for the state of New York on preparing teachers, teacher preparation in our colleges and universities, which is pretty weak on a lot of these tools. Why wouldn't you agree? And what I wanted to suggest to them is one of the new directions will be teaching teachers how to create games that support curriculum. So if I were thinking of something everyone's familiar with, like SimCity, everyone like, oh, I love SimCity, because what, it feels more serious or something. The gaming notion is immediate feedback. It is a very strong driver. And right now, the biggest move are games that might be used to, sure, teach something on the American Revolution, calculus, something about my community. I predict that we'll have games where we will have our own avatars as educator meet and build curriculum together. This is a new and very exciting direction. The microchip is going to speed up. Access is going to be less of an issue, though in parts of the United States, it is 100% third world. I am not joking. You can't even get cell phone service. So you'll have schools where the kids don't have access simply because it isn't available to them. That will change. What we're looking at then, what I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you on, is what I think is like version 2.0 of project-based learning. where we bring 3 new literacies together, and that's going to be the focus of my work. It's what I've been working on the last couple years. Because I think sometimes it gets sloppy out there, and we use the word technology too loosely. That there's a lot of good intention. There's also a lot of burrowing. Oh my gosh, there's so much. I don't know what to do. If anyone says they're overwhelmed, you'll have to leave this workshop. Because it's not okay to be overwhelmed. If you're overwhelmed, you go into paralysis. If you're underwhelmed, you're bored. What's okay? To be whelmed. Whelming is fine. And remember this, your doctors, how would you feel if you went to a doctor who said, oh, I'm overwhelmed with all these new medical breakthroughs. I just can't deal with them. The key is the way we deal with it, and I think it needs to be school-wide as opposed to piecemeal, and it needs thoughtful integration in curriculum and a concept I call upgrading, which I've been working on for several years. And we'll talk about these literacies. An upgrade is a replacement. Let me say that again. You can't add anything onto your school day, but you can replace. And we'll be looking at those questions. So, if you would, I'd like you to turn to the people you're sitting next to. And I want you to serve for a moment and act as if you were anthropologists. You're a cultural anthropologist very much in the spirit of what you would see Margaret Mead do. And what we're looking at is we're going to be going to your school, and you're going to be looking at your school and dating artifacts. These are our 2 essential questions. And who are they for? How are we going to prepare her? How are we going to transition to a 21st century version of school? Because there's not a person in this room that isn't in a 19th century version of school. All of you are in if you teach in America, you're in a 19th century version of school. I would be hard pressed to find somebody who's not. If you aren't, I'm really fascinated. I'll just start with the idea of self-contained classrooms. How many of you work in school with self-contained classrooms? Hands up. Game over. Self-container, total isolation. I mean, I can rail on that one, probably will in a minute. But the point here is these are our questions. So in order to address them, my first task is this. I'm going to ask you to go to the school in which you work as objectively as you can and look at artifacts. If you were looking at your curriculum as an artifact, if you were looking at your schedule as an artifact, and all cultures, according to Margaret Mead, are driven by what they call tokens, symbolic representation. Think of religious groups. What drives, what is representative? There is no doubt in my mind that the overwhelming majority of schools in the United States are driven by assessment. That's the driver. Come on, what's going on underneath it? Assessment. So look at your assessments as artifacts. The question isn't what you want. The question isn't even what you're doing personally. The question is, as a school, what year are you preparing her for? And you've got to have some artifacts to support it. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, and if you want to make a comment on today's meet, you can. Go, everybody. All right. Do they have some water? There's no water. Okay. Supposed to finish at 9:30. Will you guys give me a 10 and a 5? A 10 and a 5, and then this. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, 5, 4, excuse me, 3, 2, 1. We good? I'm not sure what you said. I'm not going to go around the room and ask. But I really honestly cannot tell you that I run into schools that are preparing Emily for 2020 or 2025. Even if we claim to say we're using the technology, here's the first thing I'll challenge you on. It has nothing to do with tools. It's content. American kids have dated content. American kids know very little about the last 50 years of history. How many of our kids really thoroughly know, you can count on it, any information of any substance about the BRIC countries? And I'm not just talking about the last year of high school economics, because if you don't know about the BRIC countries, we're just talking a game about global preparedness. Those are the 4 other have emerged as global powers economically. We are entwined with them. How many of your kids know anything about Brazil? We don't study it. They don't know anything about it. You just start to do a little information search and you'll find out. I didn't know either until I read Fareed Zakaria in preparation for my Curriculum 21 book. I went, holy mackerel, I don't know anything about this. Brazil is the leading country in South America, powerhouse in the world. It has surpassed Canada and the UK. I'm just telling you, economically, why is it they got the World Cup? Why is it they're getting the Olympics? Do they have problems? Yes, I have been there. The extremes are real, but guess what they have now? A middle class. They never had that. And guess what they're investing in? Education. Mineral wealth of the world. Big relationships with the Pacific Rim countries. Brazil. #1 language in demand in Miami in real estate is Portuguese, because guess who's buying it up? Russia, world's largest country, one of the best educated. Fierce history of authoritarian rule that appears to emerge again with Putin. Oil resources, great control. Do our kids know anything about it? You all know I, and you all know C. What would that be? India and China. And what do our students know? Now, I just am starting with that. But if we walk through every subject, we still have a curriculum that looks just like it did in the 70s. Why is it that I never go to a high school in this country, I've never been to one, where every English teacher is expected at least once a year to have kids read and write a screenplay? That's not even this century. It's true. How come K-1-2 do not work on, formally, television literacy? Although TV is intoxicating in its control over the young mind, we act like it isn't even there. I'm telling you, I have pulled up curriculum, I have showed it to groups, and they'll go, oh, that looks a lot like ours. I'll go, really? Welcome to the 60s. Guess when the first standardized test emerged? 1965. They're identical in form to what we are prizing right now. And I'm kind of a bit perturbed with some of the work going on in the consortia groups trying to develop what they call digital assessments. They're not digital assessments. They're multiple choice tests on a digital format. How many of you have noticed? I'm going, a digital would be that you upload your portfolio. You put in your short documentary in science. Is that coming? Yeah, and you know who's going to make it come? The teachers out there, because they are up to this. The system is nearing a meltdown, and we have got to choose our century. So my suggestion to schools is you're going to have to begin to make these adjustments. And a lot of it, yeah, will be the use of the tools. We're going to talk about that for sure, but it's also what we teach. We have to make choices. Curriculum is choice making. And also to recognize that we have new pedagogies emerging, because now we have a learner, listen to this phrase please, who needs help in self-navigation. So in looking at this question, here's the class of 2028. Did anybody have a baby born in their family this year? Congratulations, class of 2031. I hope that gets your attention. Because honestly, what gets me is you see these kids here? The kids who come in, how many of you have seen a 1, 2, 3, or 4-year-old playing with an iPad and teaching themselves something? Okay, how come pre-Ks and Ks don't reflect that in their curriculum and programs? Who teaches first grade or second grade? Can 6-year-olds say the word and know the meaning of the word triceratops? Yes, why? They're motivated, they can say it, they care, they like it, they even know paleontology. So that group can learn what an icon is. They can learn about a setting. You can establish the rules of even holding a tablet. I've been working on a big initiative in Beloit, Wisconsin, a community that was a factory town near the Illinois border, lost a lot of money. It's on its way back. 90% of the kids, I think, are very high number on free and reduced. They got a big initiative to start a laptop commitment and to do it gradually and steadily, because none of these kids had. But the first thing we started to look at was how are we going to get our kids to start to use these tools? They are intuitive, but you know how kids are with intuitive, do and throw it away. And part of it seems to me, is to note that now you see, here's the one thing that's kind of interesting. If Emily were a high school senior, and Emily has a little brother, Todd, who's a 4-year-old, Emily and I have more in common than she does with Todd, because she wasn't raised on touch technologies. Todd is. So what's happening is the pedagogies are going to need to shift with the youngest children and an influx of kids coming in with multiple access tools to engage in investigation. We need to have a willingness to grow, and I also want to get to this. This is one of my favorite points to make. Sometimes someone will say to me, well, what about my teaching? I mean, do the kids need us anymore? Here's a key point. There's 3 types of pedagogies that I'm working on right now, doing some writing on this. One is what I call antiquated pedagogy. I have no relationship with the student. I just want to cover the material. Who knows what I'm getting at? You ever heard that kind of thing? I'm getting through chapter 3. I don't care what you kids are doing. I don't even know what it's about, but I'm getting through this puppy. There's no relationship to the kids. The second is what we call classical. Anything classical is timeless. If it's timeless, it's timely. How many of you like Shakespeare? Timeless. How many of you perhaps have a religious book you think of as timeless? It's timely. In the same way, timeless teaching is classical. That has to do with a very important relationship with your students. When you are in shared physical space with them, how do you pause? When do you sit on the sidelines? When you're in front of them, how do you do a good job to make it engaging? How do you pace? How do you sequence? When do you give them the right and opportunity to initiate? We don't want to get rid of that. But we do need to recognize that students are sharing and learning in ways that are vastly different than anything we've seen in the previous century. And so what we're looking at is this, I'll move to this right away, is in making this transition. I'm going to go here, looking at my time. What we need is we have a new kind of learner that needs the best of classical and the best of the new. And in order to do this, I want to focus on 3 new literacies with you. And when we do this, I want to concretize these and give you a few tasks to make this happen. These 3 new literacies have emerged now, and we need to cultivate them actively. They don't happen without us. They need classical support to encourage them, and they sit on the shoulders of print literacy. So what we're looking at are short-term upgrades. And by that, what I'm getting at is we're going to go in, look at your existing curriculum and teaching, replace it with new practices that support these literacies in your curriculum and assessment. Long-term, we're not going to talk about so much in this session. I'll be getting more into long-term changes in the way schools are structured in one of the other sessions today. So we're looking at making replacements. So instead of the oral report, the podcast. Instead of having our students take notes in a typical fashion, we might use Today's Meet. We might use Padlet. We might use BlendSpace. So the basis for all of our work moving ahead, when I looked at pedagogy, how do I teach, what is important, is literacy. Literacy is basic communication. Literacy has to do with accessing language and making meaning from it. Have any of you ever had training in the teaching of reading? Okay, think of it like this. This is real important because you don't want to be at war with your classically trained teachers. In reading, reading is a coin with two sides. One side is phonemics. If I can decode, I can get in to read. I can see the sounds and symbols. The other side is making meaning from it. So I can decode Spanish, Romanian, French, Italian, and Spanish because they have the same phoneme pattern as what? English. But I can't make meaning from them. That's what we want to do here, is when we look at somebody being literate, it isn't just getting into the internet, it's going to be making meaning that's relevant and sophisticated in that regard. So in defining these three literacies, here's what I'd like to propose to you. And I've been working on this with schools. We do a lot of long-term work. Teachers really like it. It clarifies the work, and it allows you to see how Emily's doing in a more substantial way. In my view, there are three fundamental literacies. They're different from one another. That's a key point, and they have a place of overlap. First, if we're going to look at digital literacy, I'd like to define it as 4 capabilities that are teachable, accessible. You could provide feedback for students. We'll only take a moment on the first one. The last 3, I think, are more critical to our work today. I want to engage you in a little bit of exploration on those 2. The first is accessing. Accessing really consists of 3 ways in. That's just like phonemically decoding. One is keyboarding fluency. From what I'm finding in the research, unlike the common thought like it's on its way out, that's not what I'm finding. What I'm finding is it definitely has a place, especially for those who are working on more sophisticated languages. If you go to programs, have you ever heard of, you should take a look at this. I think schools could learn from it. It's called General Assembly. General Assembly has sites around the world, but what it is it's what business, marketing, government agencies are looking for. It's an intensive way to teach languages like Ruby on Rails, to teach very sophisticated web languages so that you can program in a short amount of time. You have to keyboard to be able to do that. Keyboarding isn't there, but here's what is changed. I remember the old 4th grade rule, which is in 4th grade you learn to keyboard. That's kind of gone out the window because so many kids come in at different levels. Who are the best keyboarders in this room? That's right. And I remember going to a high school where I saw a librarian sitting at the desktop going about 90 miles an hour, and here is this big hunk in his letter jacket going, "Mrs. Evans, how did you ever learn to do that so fast?" And she said, "High school." And he said, "Oh, it must have been great back then." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" But the truth is, we don't devote that type of time. And the majority of our high school kids are leaving with Hunt and Peck. They don't have the fluidity. So let me give you a little tip. In New Zealand, they're working on a program. The first one out I've seen is I believe it's called My Key Space. They're giving kids tools to teach themselves keyboarding using a software platform. In other words, they're making it more self-tutorials to help you improve your keyboarding skills. The next 2, just to touch on briefly, a phrase I like to use is to talk about not just touch, but to teach touch and effect, very much like cause and effect. What happens when I touch this icon? What's its effect? What is the impact of touch and how it impacts my learning? And along those lines, of course, voice activated, which we had a little example of this morning. To me, voice-activated technologies are improving speech and articulation better than almost anything I've ever heard of. I was recently in a meeting where I heard that right now they're working on a new program, and maybe some of you know about this, where teachers will be able to put in their own voice-activated responses to student work. Can you imagine? You could say some real interesting things to kids, like great, or you gotta be kidding me, whatever it is you wanna put in. This is more to the point, and these next 2, I think, are missing out there. Some teachers are doing it, but it needs to be formalized, and I'm going to give you a task in just a moment. This has to do with the ability to tag and categorize groups. So with the plethora, the amazing number of applications, how do you make sense of it? And part of it is teaching students to make categories. I had intended, and I have it on my app, I was going to use, who knows Reflector app? Reflector's awesome. I was going to use Reflector app, but I have to be on the same channel, and they've hardwired me, so I can't. But I was going to show you, if any of you were to go into your own iPads or tablets, if you go in, you all have screens, and you cluster your applications with a little tag. Am I correct? Right. So I have one called News Light, which is where I put The Onion and the Huffington Post, because I don't consider either of those, serious news. So, but that's my tag. What does that mean? That means I own it. I've interacted with it. It's not just giving kids the tags, it's the student's ability to organize. Those of you who are in science, raise your hand. You will probably remember the name of the late, great Stephen Jay Gould, who was the Harvard biologist and zoologist who wrote The Panda's Thumb. I had a chance to meet him before he died up at Harvard, and one of the things he told me was the main thing science teachers should teach kids to do is how to create their own schema. If they can organize and create their own schema, then the information is theirs, and then when they study the taxonomies of scientists, they'll understand it. In the teaching of reading, as soon as a student analyzes and groups information and labels it, it's theirs. So key is for our learners to be able to start to tag in different ways. So here's what I wanted to get to show you what I mean. In this regard, I think the #1 finding, and what we're finding is really helping schools, is creating websites with a clearinghouse. Right now, I've been working on a project with EduPlanet 21. They're actually here at the conference, and in it, we've been working on a self-tutorial on this project where teachers can learn how to create a website, but it's not just that. It's not just having a website. It's a clearinghouse that allows students to actively participate in sharing their materials. So if I go to Curriculum 21, this is my site. If you'll go now, curriculum21.com. Could you do that really quickly? Those of you who are online. Curriculum21.com. And if you'll follow and eyes on the screen, I'm going to give you a short task. Take a look up here, okay? Eyes on the screen, everybody? Okay. In the back there? Because if you miss this, you're going to miss where to go. And I'm telling you right now, you're going to want to go to here. This is a great, great site because it's built by teachers around the world. It's not me. It's these teachers. Now watch. We're going across the top to the clearinghouse. And in the clearinghouse, please watch where my cursor goes. I'm going to take this down, and I'm going to go to where it says All Resources. Did you see that? Let me do it again. All Resources. What are these? These are tags. And thousands of teachers have submitted resources, and they're tagged so that we can easily access them. In this room, for example, who tries to teach English? Okay. Do any of you sometimes feel like your kids have a weak vocabulary? All right. So I might say, okay, let's go down to the tag, and many of you will know this site. It happens to be one of my favorites. And by the way, notice there's a next. So there's 9 pages of these. Don't just think there's the first page. And one that's used by a lot of teachers, for example, is Visual Thesaurus, which is a fabulous site. So I've got a teacher having her kids write in 7th grade English about heroes, and let's take a look at the word lead. And what we'll do is we look it up, and of course, what do we see? We see a great array of alternative words, and in fact, if we choose, we can even have them
stimulus.
Yeah, it even pronounces them. Don't you hate that? I mean, then they don't need you so much anymore. And, or something like this is I think an even cooler example. I'm working with a social studies teacher, and we're going through his curriculum map, and very quickly we're saying, how are your assessments? And he says, the kids are writing essays, they're really boring. I'm going, why are they boring? He says, because it's a boring assignment. I said, that usually will do it for you. He's a funny guy, and he says, well, I'd like to upgrade it, and I'd like to use a tool. I said, let's go to the clearinghouse, and don't just stick to social studies. So he's writing about asking his kids to compare the medieval period to the Renaissance period. And instead of, let's just go quickly do something, let's be a little thoughtful here. Because if the work is good, then the content is deep. Let me repeat that. If this is good work, then you're going to go deeper. So we go in and we say, instead of having the kids write a comparative essay, let's go to art. We open the art tag. And we'll take up one of my all-time favorites is the Google Art Project. And the one thing I just hate about this is that it's free. Don't you hate things that are free? Because then you don't have an excuse. So we go in and we say, you know what, let's go, since you're asking your kids to take a look at art, let's go to Italy and let's go to the Uffizi in Florence, because guess what's on this site? Every major museum in the world. Just thought I'd mention it. So we go in, and now guess what the assignment is? The assignment is you are to go to the Uffizi, Emily. You are to choose 3 works that exemplify the values, techniques, and content of the medieval period. 3 that exemplify the same for the Renaissance. You will use GarageBand and create a podcast overlay, just you'd be like you were going through a museum, to describe the difference, and you can use music that reflects the difference as well. And while you're at it, you can go to the museum. Yeah, I can actually walk through it. I can go to any room. And the point here is this, and please hear me on this, because I've been teaching a long time, and this is some little thing I want to pass on. Like paying it forward thing. Guess what word has come back now, and I just love this word. I never paid attention to it that much. I really didn't. The word research. Do you know what research means? Search again. Guess what happens when you use really rich and interesting sites? You think this is the only place this kid's going to go to? No. Or maybe you look at something like this. Who's concerned about point of view and informational texts? Anybody? So perhaps we go here. Another one of my favorites, and it's tagged on the website. We might go to this one. And the reason I'm choosing these is because they're content rich. It's not just any site. Guess who posted them and we vetted them? Your colleagues. So this is Newspaper Map, which is one of my all-time favorites. I can go anywhere in the world. So let's say I go to Egypt. I can pull up a newspaper in Egypt. It gets translated into 30 languages. It's in Arabic. I translate it into English. And I might look at how the current situation in Egypt with the overthrow of Morsi is being covered there. Then I might go back and ask my students to do what? Anybody got an idea? We might go back and see how it's being covered in Israel. The point here is immediately available to me as a replacement, as an upgrade. So I might take an issue and have my students use this tool to examine point of view on an article. Use a tool, and the before and after is how could you improve the quality of your vocabulary in a more dynamic way. But the way we were able to do it was because we have a clearinghouse. I could show you so many examples, and you've got so many good people here who have so many to show you. I just always go to a school and I'll go, where are they? Here's one thing, I now have a new push in my work in curriculum design. And some of you may know I developed a model called curriculum mapping many years ago. I don't like a section in a curriculum called resources. I want it out of there because it's an afterthought. I want it embedded in the work. So on a curriculum map, instead of a whole series of links, nobody really looks at them that much unless you're really motivated. Instead, right in the map, we will put in the link directly in the work related to newspaper map is the task. It will be right in the formative assessment design. Can I tell you what's happening? People are using them. That's what starts to happen. And so the notion here is that we're able to share in a more dynamic way. So let me give you an example, and you're welcome to go to the clearinghouse, and I had wanted to give you an opportunity to do that right now, but I think time is really not going to allow it. Let me show you this and ask your response to it. This, I believe, should hyperlink, yes. This is Mrs. Parker. This is what we're after. This is Mrs. Parker. She changes her web page every month. And look what she's got. I just thought I saw a little Santa thing going across the moon here. That was pretty cool. She is in Oconee, South Carolina. one of the more rural sections of the United States. Her administrator is a connected educator. He models the very thing he wants all his teachers to do. Every teacher has a web page that has a voice to it, has character. This is Mrs. Parker, and she said I could show you this if I said, and I promised her I would, if I say, "Good morning, y'all." So I did it. She's a lovely teacher's teacher. And do you know what she sends her kids in the summer before they arrive in school? The link to the website. She finds out about them. But here's what I'd like your eyes on. What's this? This is her clearinghouse. Guess who submits to her to create it? Emily. See, what happens, you see, is instead of saying there's 3,000 sites out there, we vet them and we have a review process, just like you do with books and literature in a sense, but it's unit specific. So if I'm teaching a unit on the Civil War, I very likely am going to go to the archives of the Library of Congress and have up there those photographs by Matthew Brady, who was the first time we ever used photography for documenting anything. I also might want to put in something where I might even put in something like Time Toast, where I have my students create a timeline of the Civil War and embed images. But the main thing we're looking at here is that if you want your kids to be able to actively make use of these tools, then what we really need is a clearinghouse to be able to share. Would you all agree that the days of the binder are over for curriculum? Who would agree? I think down with binders would be a good bumper sticker. Do you know what the root word of bind is? Shackled. So what we want are curriculum maps that are electronic as we share as well. So this other capability under digital literacy is the ability to create. And I would argue that this is one of the areas that is most important. And certainly what we want is for every student, and in this instance, I brought this one from Peru. I was in Lima last year, or this year actually, earlier in the year, and every student at this conference, and it was a national conference, it was in Lima, teachers around Peru, teachers asked their kids before graduation through high school, each student creates their own web page that they will use for applications for colleges. This is Alessandra Navarra, and I chose her because she wants to be a teacher. And what I thought you would find of interest is that there, oops, I'm sorry, let me go back one. I think I can do it here. In her design, what she has, you'll see, is there's not a student in New Hampshire that couldn't do something like this, where in the same way we have our Common Core and have our competencies, they have 9 national competencies. If I open them up, what happens is that she is responsible for submitting her work in modules that include videos, include voiceovers, include traditional testing, and she's the person responsible to show she's ready to graduate. You know what I call it? Growing up. And so what happens, you see, is, and this is using Wix, which many of you know is a free tool and a very good web design tool. The notion then is that we want our students to be able to demonstrate these capabilities in terms of creating their expertise, but also creating apps. I think this is something that needs to be part and parcel of how we teach these days. This is Conduit app, which is one that doesn't require a lot of programming. And the first program I looked at that really was supporting this work was at Georgia Tech, a summer program for high school dropouts, where kids were being asked to create apps, and it was a winner, because you're looking at marketing, solving a problem, writing it up, and the use of these tools. I have the good fortune right now of working with some vocational schools where we're trying to bridge the academic and vocational ed piece, and guess what's allowing us to do this? A common clearinghouse of tools that we're able to share. So the idea then is that in digital literacy, we have the opportunity to access, select, create clearinghouses, and create actual tools and solutions to problems. Now, I wanted to basically, here, let me go here instead. I'll go with this one. This is the next task I have. It's very quick. But I'd like you to turn to the person you're still on speaking terms with. And here's my question to you. I'd like you to differentiate receptive media literacy and generative capability. And now I'm going to give you something else to think about as you look at that. Media mediates experience. Media mediates experience. Carolyn, you're my English teacher. I'm in 8th grade. That's even better, 14 years old. We're studying poignancy, poignant moments. We read a separate piece. And you've said, Heidi, I want you to write a short vignette about the most poignant moment of the year for you. So I go home, I do it on my word processor, I get a draft, I turn it into her. This is a mediator, just like a mediator between disputing sides. It comes between you and me and the real experience. You aren't me. You didn't experience what it was. Maybe I got in a fight with my best girlfriend, and then we made up because of her little brother or something. I mean, it might have been a really good story. But the story isn't real, the whole experience, but it's my ability to try to convey to you what we do. I just would remind you that in terms of new media, the world is full of rectangles that mediate experience. Television, it's what you don't see, too. It comes between you. The computer screen mediates. I love to go to art museums. Does anyone like to go to art museums? Isn't it interesting to see what a painter chooses to put in that canvas, that rectangle? So when we look at, and books, traditional books are in rectangles, too. Media comes between you and the author or the composer or the director of that piece. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I'd like you to define the difference between receptive media literacy and generative, the ability to produce it, but not about print. I want you to think about all the media that's out there. Go. Just take 2 minutes and discuss this, okay? Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here's something kind of interesting to think about here. Receptive and generative are words that I've taken from the New Zealand National Curriculum Standards. They are the leaders in the world on literacy who've heard of reading recovery. They're really outstanding at it. And they use those words with kids. Children know the difference. So in order for me to be able to create or produce writing or produce a film, I know how to need to be a good critic of what I take in. Otherwise, I'm at the behest of others. I think we've got these down really well in classical teaching. Who knows what I'm getting at? Who is a science social studies teacher who really wants to make sure kids check their sources? You know what I'm saying? Is it a valuable source? But how many of our students, when we look at receptive capability, know even how to find the source of any website to see if it's legitimate? Google doesn't think. It's a semantically driven web search. So if I did go online right now and I put in, everybody in the room, think of a country you've never been to, you want to go to. Okay, say it out loud to your colleague. All right, if you now you're really thinking about it. I'm sorry I gave you that one. If you put in the word Thailand, let me tell you something. If you put in the search Thailand, the first thing that will come up is a purchase site, and the next one will be Wikipedia. Wikipedia and Wikimedia are now more reliable than Encyclopedia Britannica. The British Museum chose them to display their work. They're very reliable, but I must tell you, if you take the first one, it was a purchase site. Do our kids even know how to go to the sitemap and look at the source? If I'm having my students turn in a research piece from middle school on up, even the younger ones, they don't just put the website, they have to put the source of the website. Otherwise, it's mediating what we think is true. Another interesting thing that goes on with receptive capability is that we want to not only question sources, but we want to recognize the role of imagery as both a very positive but also a manipulative force. Tonight, as I was getting dressed this morning, on MSNBC, there was something about how Chris Matthews is going to have an interview with President Obama tonight. Do you know what I'm going to be looking at? Not only I'll listen to the program, but I'm going to look at how the cameraman holds the camera. When do they focus in on the audience? Do you see all that sort of kind of thing? And one of the things we know is the youngest of children are incredibly manipulated by imagery and what they see, and we don't stop to even talk about some of those pieces. I'd like to give you a resource. Frank W. Baker is considered the leading media literacy teacher in the country. He just received a national award on this. He's an amazing guy, and he has got a chapter in our new book series with Solution Tree, which actually is coming out each month. The first one, Global Literacy, just came out. The next one's Media Literacy this month, then Leading the Literacies in January, and then Digital Literacy in February. It's been an amazing experience. It's also been like herding cats when you're working with 20 authors, I'm just going to tell you, from around the world. But Frank has his own clearinghouse filled with resources that can help you look at bias and imagery and texting and framing. And I think this is a very important consideration to be good critical users. But here's the biggest problem, I think. It's generative. So in a nutshell, because we've got limited time, but I want to just put this query out there for you. I'm really worried about kids running around with flip cameras or their digital cameras and everything's getting posted, because the quality often isn't very good. Who knows what I'm saying? And the reason is because we don't study critical media receptivity either. We don't study what makes a quality film. We don't study what makes quality TV. I don't think teachers are giving kids opportunities to create mini documentaries, because here's the sort of other side of teaching. Teachers don't like to teach something they're not feeling capable of doing themselves. Am I correct? You know, how many of you went to film school with Steven Spielberg? The point here, though, is I now have a study I can share with you, and it's also in this new book series. Edwards and Saylor in Kansas, Renata Edwards and Christy Saylor, did a 3-year study on how to improve the quality of new media outcomes. And it could have been something like Animoto. It doesn't have to always be a film. It could be, though my favorite new filmmaking tool is ScreenFlow. I love ScreenFlow. It's a wonderful program. The key was, listen to this, collaboratively designed media rubrics with students in advance. Let me say that again. That you go to your kids and say this. I could say it to you. In fact, I will. How many of you listen to a podcast pretty regularly? Now, if I asked you to say what it was, you could say it out loud. Now, I'll give you mine. I like Fresh Air on NPR. Does anyone else listen to Fresh Air? Yeah. But watch what I would do. I would play Fresh Air right now. We would take it apart, and we would create a rubric on both the technical aspects of it, sound, pacing, intro, outro, the content, the ease of Terry Gross's, or, you know, her style, who sees what we're getting at. We would create a rubric in advance. What Saylors and Edwards said is going wrong is schools are creating some media rubrics, but they're too general. They'll say like making a movie or something. It has to be tool specific. So I have in my computer a rubric for Animoto. I have a rubric for blend space. I have a rubric that I'll use for each. And if you do it with your kids in advance, guess what happens? The quality improves because you already predetermined it, one. Two, to begin to collect a gallery of student samples of media, not just in your school, but from other places. I had a painful experience of going to a conference in the nation's southeast, and it was on these types of questions. And a wonderful media specialist came up to me and she said, I'm working on a project with my social studies teacher. First time we've created a podcast. Could I play it for the group? And I said, can I hear it first? I've made that mistake before. And I didn't want to be rude in any way, and I wasn't, but here's what happened. This was really interesting. We go to a side room, we grab our lunchbox or whatever it is, and she starts playing it. And it was really not very good. She burst into tears. And I'm like, well, don't cry, it's okay, or cry if you need to, do whatever you want. But, you know, and she said, I know, but I thought it was so good. I said, you were just excited because it was your first. It was supposed to be students interviewing game changers in history, and this group, this middle school group, chose Martin Luther. And it started with music that had nothing, started with a Katy Perry song. I'm telling you, it was like, you know, fireworks, and yeah, he created some, but the point here is the kids were standing there, you could hear them rattling their paper. Hi, Martin, how did it feel to change history? It was great, I guess I rattled the Pope. I mean, the point here is it wasn't very good, and here's what I said. I said, you know what? It's a first draft. We went back, and that's when I started to work with faculties, and she helped me with this one, on creating what makes a quality podcast, because you're not going to get the results, and we're enamored now with the tools. We don't necessarily get the quality that we're after. Now, I was going to show you one that I did with a group of superintendents in Georgia, but that's okay. I think what we're going to do right now is I had hoped to be able to deal with the one that's actually the one I worry about the most, and that's global literacy. But I think time is a little bit problematic. We got off to a little bit of a late start. What time is it now? 9:23. Okay, let me give you just a few quick points, if I might, and then we'll finish up for right now. I'm going to move ahead, creating the media formats. I don't need to do this right now. This is the one I want to make sure we do. And you've been very patient with me. And if I had you for the morning, we'd be obviously working in the clearinghouse and doing other things. But in a keynote, you get to do what you get to do. But I don't want to leave this one out, because I'm not worried about the first two with you. I'm really not. You are motivated. You have to be digitally literate to help others. You are. You're trying to be more media literate. I'm going to challenge you to raise the bar and go for more quality. But this is the one that I worry about for America. I have had the good fortune of working in 6 continents. I have not worked in Antarctica. I travel a lot. And when I come home, I know this is the country I want to live in. I sincerely mean that. I do, especially as a woman. You want to live here. But we are so isolated. Our kids, and now listen to these statistics from the State Department. There are about 325 million Americans. 10% have active passports. Now we're down to about 30 million. In a year, depending on the year, 7 to 15% use them. And half of those are people like me who travel for work. So here's the bottom line. The overwhelming majority of the Emilys and Joes and Abduls and Marias born in the United States will never leave the United States. Most Americans will never leave the United States. Now, some people don't like to travel, but you know, I've been to your state. I've seen people in the northern corner of New Hampshire looking over at the Canadians playing hockey, and they won't go over there. I'm not just talking about the 3 countries that border us. Russia, yes, Sarah Palin was right. Whatever you say about her, she was right. Russia, Canada, and Mexico. I'm talking about the fact that we have a media hall of mirrors, and that American kids think everyone in the world hates us or loves us. I bet you if I pulled 50 kids from around here and I met in a room and I'd say, what do you think about America and the world? They're going to say that. Because guess what they keep having mediated towards them? People around the world either love us or hate us. And one of them might just ask me what I think. And I'll say, this is just my observation, but I'll stand on it. People around the world aren't thinking about us. People don't get up in the morning and go, how's America? Did any of you go, gosh, Paraguay's on my mind? People get up, you had your breakfast, you go to your conference. We are a beacon of hope for a lot of places, as are some other countries. We are an amazing country, the world's longest running democracy, challenged constantly, but we grow. It's a bumpy ride sometimes, but this is us, it's great. But there's things to learn from other places. And I had the opportunity to work on the CCSSO, that's the Chief State School Officers. I was on the working group for 2 years developing global competencies. The document came out, there's a free book on it, and we came up with 4. There was a group of 25 of us with state representation and a few of us who were independents to come in and a few others. And there are 4 basic competencies that I think are critical. So my big challenge to you is this. You need to globalize your classrooms. Only 25% of entering freshmen in college in the United States can find London on a map. Oh, really? It's bad. I'd also like you to add geo to more of your content. Geoliterature. Geopolitics. Geoeconomics. When you're studying ecosystems, any science teacher will tell you the world doesn't know boundaries. In fact, that's part of the problem. The boundaries get in the way of being able to work effectively. I think what we're looking at is every single classroom teacher needs to participate either in a project or in a point-to-point globalized piece that links to the curriculum, not what do kids in Japan look like. So recently I was in New Jersey. Guy is studying American Revolution. 8th grade, the kids were complaining because they'd already studied it in 5th grade. Who knows that? And he says, well, let's look at the Common Core. Common Core says we need to look at more points of view. So here's what we're going to do. He went to EPALS. He found a classroom in London where they were studying. They don't call it the American Revolution. They call it the war with the American colonists, who were considered insurgents. And they shared and swapped downloadable textbooks. So the kids in New Jersey are reading British textbooks. The first thing the students noticed, it was short. It's a short unit in England. And once a week for 3 weeks on Fridays, they would Skype with that classroom. And they were reading, of course, about the American Revolution, which is what we call it. And it was very different what was portrayed. Well, the very first session, this one 8th grader nearly set back relations with the UK by about a century. The first thing the kid says, and they're all excited to see one another, and he says, well, only question I have is why is your unit so short? Because you lost? Okay. The British kid on the other end was really gracious and just said, well, actually, no, it's just, you see, we have a lot more history than you do. Okay, that's fun, but guess what? Who's going to remember more in 6 months? And guess what else? They were being historians. They were being anthropologists. They were doing the thing. We all know of a lot of examples, but one thing I'd like to share with you is we look at this idea of recognizing perspectives, interacting. This is actually a National Geographic link with a classroom in Florida because the teacher, Sylvia Tolosano, on her Twitter search went for National Geographic, and they said, seeking 5th grade teacher in Florida to host live session with our explorer in Antarctica, and guess what she was studying? The continents. In other words, you don't just do it to do it, you do it because it's purposeful and it will allow you to go deeper. It's pretty cool. And this idea of taking action, whether it's promoting student TED Talks. I did a TED Talk a couple of years ago, and afterwards I started to say, are students doing them? And yeah, they are. I would be doing that. I think you could consider doing a TED Talk from this conference. I do. There's no reason. There are people around the country want to know about this conference. You're a very successful conference. Just a thought. And guess who else could maybe help host and moderate it or participate? Emily? And so as we look at this notion, whether it's the Skype Grandmothers Project, that is a woman from India reading to her granddaughter who goes to school in New York City. She is in Mumbai. Her granddaughter's in the class, and once a month she reads them an Indian folktale. Well, some of the kids complained. They said, what about my grandpa? He lives in Ireland. Now they've got 6 of them from around the world. or don't do it. You be the one who always reads the fairy tales. The point is that there are in front of us opportunities to globalize and personalize this work. I'm looking at time. I want to be mindful and respectful. So let me just show you one last thing. This is my parting thing. Would you all indulge me and tell me, just say yes, that you can see that I'm on the website. Just say yes. Okay. Over here, if I go to the last tab, it says Resource Hub. This is my parting gift to you. When you hit that, watch where I'm going, because if you miss this, you'll be sorry. You'll go to the Global Partnership Hub. We have an entire website devoted to connecting classrooms, projects, opportunities. The Pulitzer Center, which has the Pulitzer Prize, I work with them. And they have this free material to give educators. Nucella. We constantly are updating and adding opportunities for you to internationalize and connect your classroom, to develop those competencies. So to me, what I like is the idea of becoming, the more I can, a digitally literate, media literate, and globally literate educator, so that eventually my students can begin to produce projects that pull them all together. And that's really where I was going, and wanted to share with you some examples of that, both from, for example, High Tech High, where you see using digital applications, creating and using media, and globalizing. Or one of my all-time favorite is from the Sigsbee School in Florida, little charter school in Key West that works on the Naval Yard there. And every single grade level has created websites, podcasts that study either the coral reefs or mangroves, and they're working now with schools in Australia and creating media to share their understanding about their ocean studies that were part of the curriculum anyway. So basically, teachers take their curriculum, update, upgrade, but they're deliberate about the 3 literacies, as opposed to, I'm going to try a tool. You want to go deeper so that you understand what you're doing behind this work. So I would like to thank you for inviting me and for your joining me this morning. And I also really want to thank the leadership, and again, a tribute to Krista McAuliffe and to that face. And may we always keep that glow. And a very special thank you to Emily, okay? Thank you. Thanks very much.